In this video, I'm going to migrate data from a file share into Office 365 using Metalogic's Essentials. So the first thing we need to do is boot the application. Now, before we carry out the migration, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So the files I'm going to be migrating sit on my local disk, on my desktop, in a folder called example file share. So within there I have a folder called network drive storage and a typical department folder structure with some general team documents and some documents grouped by country. So we've got France, Ireland and the UK. I'm going to migrate that data into the finance site on my demo tenant into this library here called documents. So I'll right click on that and click view in the browser. That will browse us to that library. There we go. It's currently empty. Now, if I go and view the library settings, we'll see that I've set up a content type in this document library called Meta1 document, and that has some additional fields in it, such as a status, percentage complete, Meta1 department, and Meta country. So when I upload documents to this library, it's going to prompt me to enter those fields, and that will be relevant as we work through the wizard. So the process is relatively straightforward. We go and find what we want to take from our file share, right click on it and choose copy, and then we go to where we want it to sit in Office 365, right click and choose paste. And that initiates the migration wizard. So the first page of the wizard shows the location the data is going and the site and the list. Now you can change these from here or select a different site, but it's much easier just to find it in the navigator, right click and paste. So the next page of the wizard is where we specify the properties. See, it says specify target metadata. Now, the system knows the library the data is being pasted into, and it's picked up the default content type in that library, the Meta1 document. And as such, it's prompting me to enter the fields that I showed you when we looked at the context of the example. So we have a percentage complete, meta country, meta department, and status. So from here I can specify values for each of these fields. So for example, I can specify percentage complete as 10%. I can also specify a value for the meta country. Now this is picking from manage metadata term set, so I could specify that as Bulgaria, for example, or I can also map this to a folder. So you see, if I click on the drop down, I can now specify a folder to map to this field or any of the fields in the source. Now, in this example, let's map it to a folder. So I click on here and go to the location of the data, example file share, network drive storage, finance, and France, and count along the top. You can see if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the seventh folder corresponds to a country, and that's different for different documents within the source. So let's choose the seventh folder from here. Next, we can specify a Meta1 department. So I'm going to put finance, and a status, let's put this as published. So the remaining fields will map from the source automatically, such as the title, created date, and modified date. The created by and modified by will map from the source if we use a user map, which is what we'll look at in the next window. So finally, we have the remaining options, the advanced options. So I click on the drop down here. You see we have the option whether or not to include subfolders, overwrite if the file exists, or do an incremental copy, which will copy the changes. We can choose to copy permissions. I'll just click on the help bubble there. So this will copy the NTFS folder permissions. So for example, if you have the privilege, the write privilege in the source, you'll get contribute in SharePoint. Now, in order for that to work, we also need to remap our users, which is the final option we'll come to here. So we can flatten the folder structure or remove the folder structure. This is useful if you have a folder structure that goes many levels deep and will exceed the maximum URL. So we can do that also. Deferring required fields will upload a document even if it doesn't have metadata for some fields that are compulsory in the target. Azure Turbo mode is a function which uses an Azure tenant as a staging environment for the migration. So it pushes the data up to Azure and then Office 365 pulls it down. So this is an alternative to a direct migration where the data is pushed directly to Office 365. The advantage of using Azure Turbo mode is that the data isn't being imposed upon Office 365. It in fact requests it or pulls it down from Microsoft Azure, and as such it's less susceptible to throttling. Applying filters, we can filter out certain types of documents based on these criteria. So for example, we can include or exclude certain file extensions or files above or below a certain size. Finally, we have the option to remap users. Now, remap users is important if you want to preserve the fields for created by and modified by, and also if you want to preserve permissions. Now, in order to remap fields, we need to use a user map. So I have an example here, and I'll just show you what that looks like if I right click and click open and expand that out. So in column A, you have the user's alias in the source. So that's who I am on my disk. And in column B, you have a user's alias in Office 365. So we put that in column A, column B, save as a CSV, and then we can load it into the tool. And it will now say that one user is mapped. So the remaining options here, with the option to generate a script. This will generate a command line script for the migration job, which will enable you to run it outside of the tool from a command line or incorporate it into a PowerShell script. And you can also schedule the job to run at a later point in time or on a recurring basis. So let's just run over the options we've got. Include subfolders, remove folder structure I'm going to use as well. We've mapped our metadata and we've remapped our users. So I'm just going to click finish and kick off that migration. So that opens up the progress screen. This shows how the migration is progressing. If I click details, we can see as each item is migrated across. Okay, so now the migration is complete, we get this summary which shows 13 items were processed successfully. If I click on view log, you can see the log for that particular migration job, and each line item here is captured. I can double click on it to view more information. So if I click select all, I can save this log as a CSV and then do some auditing post migration in a spreadsheet, also save as an XML. So now, if I double click on the library we just migrated to, it should be full of some content. So I drop down to here, lists, documents. We'll see it's now containing the files from the file share. So if I right click and choose view in the browser, we can view some of the metadata for each of these documents. So things to notice immediately are the modified dates and the modified by. So the modified dates are the original modified dates. They're not pointing to today's date, which is the 2nd of March. So they're showing like 10th of June 2015, which is when I created these documents initially. So that's been preserved. The modified by is now showing Adele Vance because that's who I mapped the user to. Now, if we choose a document, for example, the finance Word document Ireland, click on the ellipses and go down to details. When the properties load on the right, you'll see that it's been tagged with the metadata we specified, 10% complete, status published, and the meta one or meta country is now showing as Ireland because it was in the folder labeled Ireland. If I go and choose a different document, for example this one, Word document France, that has been tagged with France, and equally the UK document has been tagged with the UK. So you see we have a full fidelity migration. We've preserved the created by and modified by, and we've also enriched those documents with metadata. And that is how to migrate from Fileshare to Office 365 using Metalogic's Essentials.